Welcome to the 2020 PIO CFO Summit. Our first session today is the drive for evidence-based policy making. Moderator for today is Amber Hamburg. Thank you very much for moderating, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, well, excellent. Well, thank you very much, Tia. As she mentioned, my name is Amber Heimberg. I'm a director with Guidehouse, and I'm the moderator for our panel today. Our panelists, and I will go in alphabetical order. You all are in different orders on my screen now. So, Jason Bossi is the Director of Program Performance Analysis and Evaluation at the U.S. Small Business Administration. He leads the professional staff in the implementation of the Government Performance and Results Modernization Act, Program Management Improvement Accountability Act, and the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. Prior to joining the SBA, Jason held positions designing and implementing performance management systems across other federal, state, and local government agencies, including at the Environmental Protection Agency. Our second panelist is Christine Heflin, and Ms. Heflin is a performance management practitioner with over 30 years of leadership in government innovation and improvement at the federal and local level. She was with the Department of Commerce early in her career as an intern and returned in 2010 to the department to serve as the Director of Performance Excellence. She is also the Commerce Deputy Performance Improvement Officer and was recently appointed to serve as the Interim Evidence Officer. And our third panelist is Jed Herman. Jed is the Vice President for State and Federal Policy Implementation at Results for America. And Jed leads the organization's work to help state governments and federal agencies get better results by improving their use of data and evidence. Okay, so I wanted to provide just a little bit of context to everyone about how we have structured this panel. We have about 30 minutes of prepared materials covering three topics, three sort of large topics. The first being what the Evidence Act is and how it's initially being implemented at SBA and Department of Commerce and across the government. The second being some of the early successes and challenges of implementing the Evidence Act since it was signed into law in July of 2019. And the third being what the first milestones, how the first milestones are coming along. They are due in September 2020. That is the learning agenda and the capacity assessments. So we have prepared remarks and slides related to those three topics. And as we go through those topics, as you have questions, please do leverage the chat box and enter those questions at that time, because at the end of the 30 minutes, we'll have about 20 minutes to do questions. And Kia, we still close at 9, right? So we have 45 minutes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, unfortunately, because we are a little bit behind, that'd be great.
Okay, all right. So our remaining time will be all in the questions, and so if you wait until the end of the prepared remarks and type in your questions, then we will have a delay. So we would just, as you have questions, as they strike your fancy, just type them in the chat, and then Kia will be funneling them to me at the end of our prepared remarks. Okay, so and Kia, do I have control of the slides?
Yes, let me give you that. Thank you. All right, there you go.
All right. Okay, so we introduced our panelists. All right, so our first topic is what is the Evidence Act and how is it impacting agencies? So before we start with our comments, we wanted to get a sense for how much the audience actually knows about the Evidence Act. So actually we have a polling question for you. And Kia, I believe you can kick this off. But what we would like to know is how familiar are you with the Evidence Act and what it requires agencies to do?
Okay, and on your screen, you should be able to see the polling question. It's a blue screen.
No offense.
And unfortunately, our panelists will not be able to answer. But for our attendees, go ahead and click on your screen. Are you familiar with Evidence Act and what it requires agencies to do? All right. So we'll give you a few seconds.
No.
All right.
No.
Okay. And I will close the polling now.
Okay, so,
Results.
oh wow. So actually, most of us don't know what the Evidence Act is, so that's very helpful. But about 39% of us have heard of it and are not sure of the details. Okay. Well, I think that is very informative then. And so we will move to, I will transition over to Jed, who will provide a description of what the Evidence Act is.
Great. Thanks, Amber. Good to be with you all this morning. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to be with you. That poll is a great lead-in for me to give a little background about the Evidence Act and what it does. So it's bipartisan legislation that went into effect last year, and it's based on the recommendations from the Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking, which ended a couple years ago and was composed of experts from government, academia, and related fields. And overall, the goal of the Evidence Act is to increase the federal government's building and use of evidence. The idea is to improve how federal agencies are using evidence in decision-making across a wide variety of domains, including budget, policy, operations, and regulations. Now, evidence may seem like an intimidating term, especially if you're not an evaluator or like our other panelists lead an agency evaluation shop. But the law defines it fairly broadly. It's performance measurement, it's policy analysis, it's program evaluation. It's basically any data or information the agency has that can help inform their decision making. There's a wide variety, as we'll talk about today, of how that evidence and data can be used at different times. And so while many agencies are already using this kind of information in their everyday business, the law envisions a much broader infrastructure for agencies to do that and to coordinate among the different parts of their agency. So it requires some rethinking about how evidence building, data management, and the data access functions in agencies are better connected to inform actions by all parts of the agencies, not just a program evaluation shop or not just the CFO's office or a performance improvement office. And so to that end, the law has a few specific recommendations that are worth going over at a high level, and we'll dive into more detail in the rest of the panel. So it requires agencies to name officials to oversee various areas of work. So an evaluation officer, a chief data officer, and in some cases, depending on the agency, a statistical official. Requires agencies to do learning agendas and capacity assessments, which we'll talk about in more detail later. Those are some of the first deliverables. It has important implications for ways that the data is used in the federal data strategy by making, for example, federal data open by default rather than closed by default. And of course, there are exceptions for national security or other concerns like that. It requires cross-agency coordinating bodies for data officers and evaluation officers and others, and make some other important changes to statistical agencies and the work they do as well. But I think that before we get too in depth in the requirements of the law at a high level, it's important to remember that the overall goal of the Evidence Act is to make sure agencies are better using data, analysis, evaluation, evidence to inform what they do to get better results for the American people. And I'll just note on the bottom there, for those of you that are less familiar, you can find summaries and much more information about the Evidence Act and related OMB guidance that fleshes out the Evidence Act in more detail on the Results for America website. And you can see that address at our Evidence Act resource hub at the bottom of the screen there. That has a lot more information that can be useful, and I'll refer to that in some of my other comments today as well. So with that, I'll turn it back to Amber.
Great. Thank you very much, Jed. So now we will move to Christine, who will talk about how the Department of Commerce has started to implement the Evidence Act.
Okay, sound check coming through, I hope. At the Department of Commerce, we're blessed with a Deputy Secretary who is very enthusiastic about the Evidence Act. She also plays the role of being one of the co-leads of the data pillar of the President's management agenda. So she's encouraging and doing everything possible to have a great implementation at the Department of Commerce, because she's wearing both those hats and hopes us to be a role model. We have a chief data officer, evaluation officer, and statistical on one team. For the moment, I'm detailed to work with them directly. And this is a great boon. It was a good idea, because I'm learning more about data accessibility than I would if I had the data officer at arm's length. And he, in turn, is learning more about internal needs to use data. Our wonderful statistical agencies, the Census Bureau, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, are very outward-facing in their culture. They're feeding data to academics. They're feeding data to chambers of commerce. Now we need them to feed more data to the team, to the internal organization. So by working directly with the data officer, I can encourage and keep that need on their radar screen. We have a governance board. We started that early. There's a great deal of engagement. But now that we're in the process of actually creating some important deliverables, such as an assessment of data skills across the department that's required by the federal data strategy, the engagement has gotten very high because people feel like this is real, this is affecting our lives. We have to, because of the nature of commerce, take a very decentralized approach with extremely diverse bureaus, everything from the National Weather Service to the Economic Development Administration to the Patent Office to the Census Bureau. Very, very different needs. So we're setting broad guideline, a broad framework, and then the bureaus within that framework have a lot of discretion about the particulars. And then lastly, because I am also the Deputy Performance Officer, we're moving in the direction of having the evidence work very closely integrated with the performance work. If you all work at all with logic models, you know that the performance work is about the measuring processes, measuring outputs, and then of course evaluations about measuring impact. And you need all three of those to learn and improve your strategic plan. So that's our basic framework.
All right, thank you, Christine. I will transition over to Jason now, who will describe how SBA is moving forward.
Thanks, Amber, and good morning, everybody. At the SBA, similar to all federal agencies, we've appointed our officials, our evaluation officer. I serve as the evaluation officer as well as the deputy performance improvement officer of the agency. The statistical official and the chief data officer also work within my organization. And it's important that we're able to come together and discuss key issues. And we do have a very good working relationship. And I would encourage each of you to think through who your officials are and connect with them where possible. We've also established our data governance board and are prioritizing our data sets. And that's important for us as we think not only about performance management, but also program evaluation and evidence building, because we want to have a full spectrum and understanding of what data is available, particularly administrative data that we use for both purposes. And we hold weekly meetings with our Evidence Act officials to go through the requirements of the federal data strategy, as well as our deliverables under the Evidence Act. We at the SBA have a enterprise learning agenda. We've actually are working on our fourth update now. We just published our third enterprise learning agenda at sba.gov/evaluation. And last year we published, in February of this year, we published our first annual evaluation plan. And our annual evaluation plan outlines 5 evaluations we're going to be completing through FY 2021. And then we're going to be working on our 2022 evaluation plan as part of the FY 2022 OMB submission, and that will outline our upcoming and planned evaluations for that year. We've also are in the process of developing our capacity assessment. Jed mentioned that at the beginning. Capacity assessment helps us understand where we are with evidence building activities, as well as staff skills within the agency. We're piloting it within a couple offices within the agency and working with those program staff to understand the skill sets that they have available, as well as the different evidence and evaluation projects that they have ongoing. And once we finalize that, we'll roll it out to the full agency, and that will give us a snapshot or a baseline essentially of where we are and how we can continue to improve as an agency in order to build evidence and evaluation capacity.
Great. All right. We will move on to our next topic, which is on early successes and challenges of the Evidence Act. And I will turn this over to Jed again as soon as the slide changes. Okay, there we are.
Great. Thanks, Amber. And I want to pick up on Jason and Christine's points that the law has some very important requirements in 2020 that are really going to drive, or are driving agencies' activities. So first, as Jason and Christine mentioned, agencies were required to name evaluation, data, and statistical officials in some cases. And for the most part, we've seen that agencies have met this requirement, though in some cases there has been some double hatting of officials that have other duties or naming acting officials. Obviously, neither of those is ideal, as we want permanent people and dedicated people in place on that. Second, the law requires some governance structures, and Jason mentioned how internally at SBA, they've been building those governance structures, as did Christine. And so it's great to see that agencies are building those governance structures that have some combination of their data, evaluation, performance, fiscal, and program staff. The best models, I think, bring together representatives from all these areas and create a specific structure to allow evidence to inform the work of program offices, operational units, and other parts of the agency to really create a cycle that can allow for continuous improvement and ongoing building, as Jason said, to sort of create a baseline and then move from there and see how the agency is progressing, both in terms of the formal capacity assessment, but also informally in terms of how is this work informing how program offices and others are doing their work. And so this internal work is really at the heart of the Evidence Act. So it's encouraging to see that agencies are thoughtfully building those structures to be able to use data and evidence for continuous improvement. At the cross-agency level, OMB and the General Services Administration have convened evaluation and data councils that are required by the law, made up of those named officials from agencies, and they're doing important work of sharing best practices and strategies across agencies. In addition, agencies are making important progress on inventorying and unifying their data catalogs, updating their data policies, and other important activities related to making data more usable and accessible. There are some challenges, which is natural anytime you're having to build new ways of doing things, and agencies, I think, are being asked to stretch themselves in new ways to develop learning agendas and capacity assessments, which we've mentioned here, and we'll go into more depth in a moment. I just want to, before we go to the next slide, I want to say you can get some more details on how agencies are doing. I put the link at the bottom of the screen there. We do an annual scorecard that looks at how a subset of agencies are using evidence and data in their budget management and policy decisions. And so last year, we updated our Results for America Federal Standard of Excellence to reflect the Evidence Act. And so this scorecard has some good examples of early progress that agencies are making and lots of good examples of what agencies are doing to make progress in both the spirit of the Evidence Act as well as the letter of the Evidence Act. So I'll turn it back to Amber with that.
Great, thank you, Jed. All right, so Jason, can you talk about some of the successes and challenges that you had? And the slide will turn. There you are. Okay, at SBA.
Great. So we'll talk a little bit about the results-driven framework, and I think the next slide after this we'll talk a little bit about some of those next steps. So I want to provide this picture. This is a standard framework that was built under the GPRA, the Performance Management Structure. We've added to it to demonstrate how evidence and evaluation fit within that framework, and they are part of the same picture essentially. And so we obviously have our strategic plan that guides our performance management processes, our goals and objectives. But I also wanted to highlight the enterprise learning agenda connection in there, because we at the SBA have tied our evidence and evaluation questions back to the strategic goals within our strategic plan. So there is that connection back to the prioritization within the agency. So each office is represented. We have our priority questions that will help guide us where we need additional evidence to inform decision making. And then again, the annual evaluation plan connects back to that by demonstrating what are the actual evaluations that will be conducted in that particular year. So think of the strategic plan and the enterprise learning agenda as those broad governing structures. And then, when we have the analyze and evaluate, we have our performance dashboards, performance analysis, but we also have other evidence building activities. We're monitoring program evaluations. And then we're also reviewing not only performance as part of the quarterly deep dive reviews, but also our program evaluations and other findings. And so we integrate evidence into that decision-making process. And then for transparency and accountability, we report out not only our performance measures as part of our annual performance report, but we also publish our evaluation reports and any other evidence building activities this past year, we've worked with several new program offices to develop logic models. Our goal is to have logic models for each of our programs within the agency. So this provides a broad picture of how we have developed evidence and performance for our agency. And if we can go to the next slide, I can talk about some of the other. Well, actually, I think this might be Chris.
It's Christine. So we'll come back to this, I guess, for the next section.
All right, sounds good.
Okay. So then, Christine, do you want to talk about some of the challenges? There you are. The roses parallel the thorns discussion.
Yeah.
Okay.
As in so many situations, your strengths also present certain challenges. I mentioned earlier that the Department of Commerce has very diverse bureaus, 11 of them, very different missions. They also have great esprit de corps. It's a beautiful thing to behold, but they're fiercely independent and have to have anything we do kind of tailored to their needs. You know, the Census Bureau is very different from the Patent Office. So their esprit de corps, when they're bought into something, their enthusiasm, a great strength, but coordination is a challenge because they are very different, because they are fiercely independent, and we need to harmonize our findings in terms of things like the data skills assessment has to be done this year according to the federal data strategy. So we need to be able to speak to each bureau, but also be able to make some generalizations across the department and do it in a somewhat consistent manner so we can present our methodology as one that has integrity. Another great strength is the Census Bureau and BEA. There's no way to overstate their dedication, and their particularly the dedication to continuous improvement. They, apart from the folks who are doing the decennial right now, or any given survey, they have armies of brilliant people looking for a better way to improve those statistics. Constant improvement is their backbone. So that's great. Obviously, the data has to have the highest level of quality, but they do face outwards. For decades, their major customers have been academics, think tanks. We need now them to think of us internally, all the bureaus, as their customer, and how can they help us use their data for internal evaluation. So kind of reorient the culture a little bit on the part of the statistical agencies. Evidence integrated into operations, particularly at our scientific agencies. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, also they develop standards for the entire nation for products. They define steel, they even define peanut butter. But they also work on very, very edgy projects. They're doing the state-of-the-art research on quantum computing, AI. So science is about building evidence and strength of evidence around a particular position. The thorn is that even though the scientific organizations are about evidence, if you look at their budgets, you don't see an evaluator, you see scientists. So a thorn is saying, okay, now where do we draw the line between what is evaluation, what is science, and what is research? I'll give AI maybe as an illustration. So NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, is developing standards for AI. How do we know it's reliable? How can a manager who can't do AI rely on AI? What features do they need to have? Now that's obviously answering a question, a research question. When can we depend on AI? How can I tell if it's dependable? So it's R&D, and it's also evaluation.
All right, thank you very much. All right, so now the next topic was the progress towards the milestones for, these are due September 2020, the learning agendas and the capacity assessments. And again, we wanted to do a quick polling question just so the panelists could understand sort of the level of knowledge. Based on the first polling question, I'm going to assume that I have some assumptions about what the answer might be for this, but Kia, if you could kick off polling question number 2 for us. Thank you very much. right? So how familiar are you with learning agendas or capacity assessment activities at your agency? And so ranging from very familiar to have never heard of them at all.
Right. Well, we have about 60% of you responding. So in about 10 seconds, I will hide the survey and then I will share the results with you.
Great.
Okay. Let's go ahead and close the survey. And here are your results.
And there we are. So we have 60% have never heard of either. And about 17, 18% of it has at least heard of them. 4% though have actually assisted with creating them, which is great. So, all right. And, all right. So Jed, do you want to discuss sort of what is expected with the learning agendas and the capacity assessments?
Yes, great. Thanks for that polling question. It's very helpful. So as we mentioned, the learning agenda and the capacity assessment are two of the early milestones of the Evidence Act, both of which have a form of drafts due in September. And so by way of background, a learning agenda is just a set of research questions that, when answered, can improve the effectiveness of an agency or any organization's program. So simply put, it's a list of what the agency wants to learn about its programs and operations, and it's a centralized way to organize the agency's research and to engage others in the agencies and outside the agencies in helping answer those questions. And so many agencies have been using some version of this learning agenda, perhaps calling it different things in recent years. However, the Evidence Act asked them to broaden this work and to include more internal and external stakeholders. And this stakeholder engagement work is really a key tool to make sure that agencies' learning agendas are reflecting the most important areas for exploration and improvement, make sure that they're bringing the community into their community at large, as well as just specific people that they're serving into this process. And it really makes sure that they're meeting the needs of their customers, both internally and externally. And so we've been doing a lot of work on this at Results for America. We have some resources on our website there you can see related to the learning agenda to help agencies think through this more. The Urban Institute has done some webinars, but I want to say that the learning agenda is really an important tool to do this. And then on the capacity assessment, that's basically asking agencies to look at their statistical evaluation, research, and analysis efforts. And so using this, as Jason mentioned, agencies can determine where they are and figure out ways to make progress, ways to identify shared concerns, prioritize actions, and make improvements in order to get better. And so, you know, a capacity assessment is an extremely useful tool for any type of organization to get better at what they do. But unlike learning agendas, capacity assessments have not been a featured tool for federal agencies. So this work is new and a little more challenging for agencies. I think there are a few important things to keep in mind. One is that the Office of Management and Budget is not prescribed a specific format or checklist that agencies have to use for the capacity assessment. So that means they can use whatever structure and content they think best reflects their unique structure, mission, and the current level of evidence and data use of their agencies, which is in some buckets that both the law and OMB have set out as required to be included. Two, it's going to be an ongoing process. So there's an interim draft. The capacity assessment is due in September, but the final version is not going to be published until 2022. So agencies are going to be able to use this first draft, as Jason mentioned, as a starting place to iterate and improve over the next few years. And third, like the learning agenda, the capacity assessment is a great vehicle to bring people from different parts of an agency together and begin a process of continuous improvement. I do want to mention on the capacity assessment, we do have some specific resources that may be helpful for agencies, again, on our and others in our Evidence Act Resource Hub. First, last month, we hosted a webinar with the Urban Institute that focused on capacity assessments and how agencies are doing that. And it features specific examples from agencies that have gotten a head start on this work. Second, as a follow-up, also on the website, Project Evident, which has worked with hundreds of organizations at nonprofits and in governments as well, has a new brief that we posted on that website about the sort of the overall purpose and tools of capacity assessment. And then finally, we've just released a new capacity assessment brief on our website as well there that gives it's about a 10-page guide on how agencies can do this work and different things they can consider. And so All those items are available in the Evidence Act hub with the address of the list at the bottom of your screen. And I should mention, if folks want to follow up afterwards, there's a way to do that by sending an email to info@Results for America or me directly, Jed@Results for America. We're happy to answer other questions that people have about the capacity assessment or the learning agenda and resources that may be helpful. So with that, I'll turn it back to Amber.
Great. Thank you very much. And the next topic is for Christine to talk about how the learning agendas and capacity assessments are coming together at Commerce.
Jed, I'll be emailing you later in the day. I need to know from you and Jason more about your capacity assessment. I feel very challenged in that, so glad I'm listening up. So where are we and what's next? We have some priority questions we developed for the learning agenda. I'll add that the learning agenda, I think Jason alluded to this, it's meant to reinforce a learning loop. That's classic for any good organization, where your strategic plan, in essence, is a hypothesis. We think if we do this, we'll get that. And then the performance folks measure whether you're doing it quickly and up to quality. They find out the outputs. But then, did we actually achieve the impacts? Did it happen? Or what were the characteristics of a successful project? That's fed back into the strategic plan. And hopefully every year we get a little smarter. So that's our aspiration. Every year, smarter when we come to Congress for some money. And we've got our questions. We also have COVID-19 that's spread across the country. So I'm talking to our bureaus and saying, okay, in light of what just happened, where our economy is, do we need to change some of those questions? Should our priorities shift in light of all the effort it's going to take to reignite the economy and get us back to where we were? So there's some definite updating to do. And then lastly, to actually do our plan that's due in September, the learning agenda / list of questions that are priority. What methodologies, what data? There's a lot of specifics to get into. In terms of the capacity assessment, I asked for some initial information way back in January, December to get a handle on where we are. But organizing that information in a way that's articulate and really points out what's strong and where needs are will be a challenge. Again, we have two organizations that are entirely dedicated to producing the best statistics in the world. That's quite a capacity. Right? What capacity then do we have to actually evaluate our social sciences? And we have agencies that are in the social sciences. The Economic Development Administration helps areas whose economies are lagging behind the rest of the nation. How's their techniques working? The Minority Business Development Administration is doing evaluations right now in terms of their assistance to minority businesses and on. So how do I harmonize findings on a statistical agency, a purely scientific organization, and a social science organization, and throw in there NOAA? And NOAA has three pieces. They do ocean health. They also do fisheries sustainability, and they are the Weather Bureau. So all those have to be somehow harmonized into some common findings about our capacity. And then lastly, we need to set up permanently in a more stable structure for our whole big threes: data officer, evaluation officer, statistical officer. What kind of staffing do they need to do this and to do the work prescribed by the data? So those are the things very important things on our to-do list.
All right. And then finally back to Jason, where we cut him off previously on his progress with the learning agendas and capacity assessments. See on my slide. Oh, there it is. Okay.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to talk about future opportunities. So for us, as I mentioned earlier, we're building out our priority data sets, and we're really looking to see how we can curate microdata and build out other analytic tools to help not only senior leaders, but also the program and project managers to drive decisions. I think it's important for us to think through how can everybody within an agency, as well as our stakeholders, use our data or other data to help drive decisions, policy decisions, programmatic decisions, to better support our customers, our stakeholders, and meet congressional intent. For us, we've been building stronger connections with federal agencies. We've been partnering with the Census Bureau on data sets and projects, looking at outcome evaluations with some of our loan programs. And we've been looking at building out connections with researchers as well, with the idea to help improve performance of our programs. With some of our research projects, we've been partnering with a few universities on key priority questions from our enterprise learning agenda. And these have helped us better understand our programs, develop more evidence, and think through how we can improve processes. One point I'd want to make, and something to think about as a community, and particularly from the financial management community, is are there opportunities to strengthen and potentially streamline processes within your work stream, and think about how those could be integrated into the enterprise learning agenda. For us, we have questions related to acquisition management, internal controls, as well as other management functions that we have as part of our learning agenda to help think through kind of the broad spectrum of services we provide within a federal agency. And many of those services are obviously across multiple agencies. And so think through how those can be connected and tied back to your work and engage with the broader evidence and evaluation efforts.
Amber, I think you're on mute.
Apologies. So I was saying that ends the prepared remarks that we had pulled together. And so now we will move to the question section. And Kia, I believe we have about 10 minutes for questions. Is that right?
Correct. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, perfect. All right. So I have a couple of them here in my chat window. And all right, looks like the first question we have is for Jason. And it is, will SBA be reporting on the impact of the payroll protection program and how many jobs it saved, in what states, in what industries, where will citizens see this information? Lots of questions in that one question.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for that. I think as many people know and have seen on the news, we have been helping support economic recovery through the Paycheck Protection Program for small businesses. And we've been able to put nearly $500 billion into the economy to help save millions of jobs. And that information is currently reported online. We have been publishing summaries of the data, but we have, as Chris has also mentioned, thinking through not only COVID-19, but also CARES Act implementation, what updates we need to make to our enterprise learning agenda as we think through how we can improve our programs, and thinking through and then also the long-term outcomes associated with CARES Act, and in particular with the Paycheck Protection Program, as well as the economic injury disaster loans we provide to small businesses. And so those questions you will see in the next update, and we are working through getting that information available.
Okay. All right. Here is, I think, a broader question for everyone is, how has the emerging focus on social equity impacted your evidence agendas? So I guess that would pertain somewhat to how, Christine, you mentioned how your learning agenda was changing through the course of COVID, and now with the refocus on social equity and how that manifests itself within your organization. So.
Yes. Sound is coming through a bit choppy here, so I hope you can hear me okay.
Okay.
Part of the Department of Commerce is the Minority Business Development Administration, and they fund a network of basically their centers around the country that provide assistance, technical assistance, sometimes funding assistance to minority businesses. We are working with them very closely to craft the best possible question to help us assist minority businesses. We're considering a few different approaches. One would be to look at case studies around the country and say, okay, where has the federal assistance, both from the Department of Commerce or any other agency, particularly been effective? And if it is, what's the combination of factors that seems to support that success? If we know the combination of factors, everything that's critical and necessary for success, we'll be able to craft our interventions much better. So I won't give you an exact research question, just that we are going to perform an evaluation to help us do a better job of assisting the minority communities and minority businesses. We do know that there's a big issue around availability of capital for them. That's a long-standing issue. But what's the best solution? We hope to have more information on that going forward. And that shows you the virtues of the Evidence Act. We don't want to run at the same problem over and over again without more information on what actually helps the community.
This is Jed. I would just add to that and say I think that both the processes we talked about today, the learning agenda, in particular the stakeholder engagement piece, are really key mechanisms to be able to improve the equity and the delivery of federal programs. So specifically, a learning agenda helps agencies identify what they should be researching and exploring. And to the degree that they are doing effective stakeholder outreach and engagement, that should be reaching into communities to ask people in those communities what's important to them, and that having that be reflected in the research and evaluation work that agencies are doing. And so certainly I think that's a huge equity lever in terms of shifting some of the work of federal agencies to look specifically at those equity pieces. And then on the capacity assessment, I think that's a little more tangential related, but the point of the capacity assessment is for an agency to think about how it's using its capacity to improve results. And the missions of agency is to make sure that people in the country and residents across the country are delivering services and making the best of their lives and having opportunities. I think the focus on evaluation and the capacity of the agency to deliver on their mission is also a key driver of equity as well.
Okay. Our next question is to Christine. How has Commerce prioritized the learning agenda preferences of your various agencies? Did you hear me?
Yeah, I think the question was how
Okay.
we prioritize the learning agenda.
Right.
Well, some of our top questions are around administration priorities. This administration has really pushed aquaculture. Folks don't know that 90% of our seafood is imported, that we have plenty of coastline. So we have been trying to do any number of things, including contribute some science to promoting aquaculture. We want to know how's that going? Did we increase it? So there'll be some evaluation around that. Another administration priority is around space commerce. The U.S. is right now dominant in commercial space commerce. We would like to keep it that way. How's it going so far? So some of them are priorities. Others are frankly big ticket items. So NOAA has been moving from, they observe the climate, they observe the weather, they observe the conditions of the ocean, and they do it through very many different media. But historically, a lot of it was human, people going out and taking measurements. We're moving more and more to unmanned observation equipment. That is something that has to be done well to maintain the data stream. So it's important both from the standpoint of the science and also in terms of costs to assess where is that unmanned equipment best utilized and which pieces and how do they interface. So cost is also an issue. And then also, really, if you look at Commerce's core mission, it's about the economy and about jobs. So you're going to see a lot in our agenda that have to do with are the different techniques, the interventions we're doing, are they bringing home the bacon, are they bringing home the jobs, and are there conditions that we can look for that promote more success than the typical intervention?
Just add a quick thought there to say, sort of take the overarching question of how are agencies with many different sub-agencies and responsibilities thinking about their learning agenda. one approach we've seen agencies take that have many sort of disparate things under their umbrella, like Commerce does, is to build individual learning agendas for some of those sub-agencies, and then boil up some of those most important questions or overarching questions into an agency-wide agenda. So to be able to be specific and detailed in the way that space exploration or aquaculture needs to be, but also at a agency level, being able to think about what are the pressing overall things for the agency. And that's a key place where internal stakeholder engagement can help bubble up and prioritize those questions.
I would say the Evidence Act has been a great force behind increased collaboration. I've had an evaluator from the Census Bureau, actually you could call him a research methodologist, talking to all the bureaus with me. And we're finding many more synergies. We expected to find some, we're finding many, many more. An easy one was Census was already doing some work for SBA on SBIRs, which I believe this is set aside for small businesses for research and development. And they were doing that. Well, the Commerce Bureaus also have SBIR requirements, so they can they will fold in looking at some of our SBIR interventions, seeing how successful it is, what's the impact, as well as SBAs. So we found out that we were helping SBA and could also help ourselves.
That's right.
You're unmuting it, Amber.
But we have 2 minutes left, and we've got one question here. It speaks to siloed perspectives within the agencies. And it says, evidence, performance, and cost are often siloed perspectives with agencies. How do you start to break down those silos?
I mean, I can take that. I think from our perspective, it's having the communications with individuals in those respective offices. The nice thing about SBA is, at least from performance evaluation and cost, we all sit within the Office of Performance Management, the Chief Financial Officer, so we're all one office. But I think for those larger departments, larger agencies, the important part or item I see with the Evidence Act is building those connections to other offices and other agencies, and that will help break down those silos, because there are a lot of questions that will cross areas, as Chris and Jetta mentioned, and that's an important part. And data will bring us all together because we all use data, and so that's a key force to help us come together.
I just want to
in terms of cost control.
One of the things. Oh, go ahead, Christine.
Just in terms of cost control, we had a very successful pilot project where the Census Bureau used some data from the International Trade Administration on businesses assisted, and then made a comparison group from their demographic data on businesses that were similar to the ones that were assisted to promote exports, and compared the unassisted to the assisted to see if there was any apparent benefit in export level from the intervention from the International Trade Administration. It was done very inexpensively because we're using our data and our expertise. And I think one of the things we need to do to fulfill the promise of the Evidence Act is find ways to do the evidence building where it doesn't cost multi-million dollars every time we take a look at something. This was very cost effective, and I hope it's a model that we can reproduce in other areas.
I was just going to say, as sort of a closing thought, that I think that's really the power of the Evidence Act, is what you're seeing is building internal structures and connections to be able to answer things like the questions between cost and quality or effectiveness. And just both the way Christina and Jason outlined it, it really creates relationships internally that can actually, in the long term, identify activities that agencies perhaps no longer need to be doing, or activities they can do in synergy better together. And so I think while things like learning assessments and learning agendas and capacity assessments are really important, the overall power and spirit of the law is bringing people together in agencies to break down some silos and be able to think about how, as an organization, enterprise-wide approach, are we working together, and how is data a tool, and evidence a tool, and evaluation a tool to help us do our work better.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much. We're actually a minute now over the time frame, so I just wanted to say thank you to the panelists, and say that hopefully that everyone got something out of this panel, because and can walk away now saying that, yes, you know about the Evidence Act and you know the expectations, and can dig into how your agencies are actually moving forward with the activities and requirements of the Evidence Act. So, Kia?
Great, thank you very, very much. Hi, Amber, thank you very much.